The blazing sunset painted the dusty town of Willow Creek in hues of orange and gold as Ryder Phelps stood alone outside the saloon, his eyes fixed on the horizon with the same hardened gaze that had kept everyone at arm's length for the past 8 years. The year was 1875, and the West was as wild as the mustangs that roamed the plains, but not nearly as wild as the pain that still galloped through his heart. "Another whiskey," Ryder muttered as he returned to the smoky interior of the Dusty Trail saloon, his spurs jingling with each heavy step. The bartender, a portly man named Sullivan who had learned not to ask questions, slid the amber liquid across the worn wooden surface without a word. At 32, Ryder had earned his reputation as the most skilled and solitary ranch hand in the territory, taking jobs that would send him far from crowds and complications. "Marshals looking for experienced men," Sullivan finally ventured as Ryder downed his drink. "Stagecoach coming through tomorrow. They're worried about the Hadley gang." Ryder's fingers tightened around his glass. "Not interested in being anybody's hero." "Pays $20, Sullivan added, wiping a glass with a rag that had seen better days. $20 was enough to keep Ryder in supplies for a month in the wilderness, away from prying eyes and painful memories. He nodded once, the brim of his hat shadowing the scar that ran across his right cheekbone, a permanent reminder of why he rode alone. When dawn broke over the eastern hills, Ryder was already at the marshal's office, his bay stallion Thunder tethered outside. 4 other men had answered the call, none of whom Ryder knew well enough to call friends. That was precisely how he preferred it. "Stagecoach is carrying a banker's daughter and some valuables," Marshal Turner explained, his gray mustache twitching as he spoke. "You'll meet it at Copper Ridge and escort it to town. Should be straightforward enough." Straightforward jobs had a way of turning complicated, Ryder knew, but he kept that thought to himself as they rode out, the morning sun warming their backs. The land stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional juniper. It was the kind of emptiness that most men found unsettling, but Ryder found peace in its honest brutality. They reached Copper Ridge by midday, taking positions among the rocks to watch for the approaching stagecoach. Ryder kept to himself, checking his Winchester rifle and Colt revolver methodically. His father had taught him that a man's weapons were his lifeline in the West, and it was one of the few lessons Ryder still honored. The stagecoach appeared on the horizon, a cloud of dust announcing its approach long before the sound of hooves and wheels reached their ears. As it drew closer, Ryder could make out the driver and shotgun messenger, their postures alert but not alarmed. "Looks clear," muttered one of the men, a young buck called Farley who seemed too eager to prove himself. "For now," Ryder replied, his voice low. "Hadley doesn't strike until you think you're safe." The stagecoach rolled to a stop beneath them, and Marshal Turner signaled their presence. As the group descended to meet the travelers, the door of the coach swung open, revealing a sight that made Ryder instinctively tighten his grip on his rifle. A woman stepped out, her deep blue traveling dress a stark contrast to the dusty landscape. Her chestnut hair was pinned beneath a modest hat, but a few rebellious curls had escaped to frame her face. She was not classically beautiful in the way of painted saloon girls, but there was something in her direct gaze that caught Ryder off guard. "Miss Lillian Brennan," the driver announced, helping her down. "Daughter of Edward Brennan of the First National Bank of St. Louis." Lillian Brennan nodded to the men, her expression betraying exhaustion but not fear. "Thank you for the escort, gentlemen. I understand the journey ahead may be perilous." "We'll see you safely to Willow Creek, madam," Marshal Turner assured her. As they prepared to continue, Ryder kept his distance from the stagecoach and its occupant. He had learned long ago that soft hands and softer voices led only to heartbreak or worse. 8 years had passed since he'd buried his wife Sarah and their unborn child, victims of a raid that had occurred while he was away driving cattle. 8 years of deliberately avoiding anything that might reawaken the feelings he'd buried alongside them. The journey began smoothly enough, with Ryder taking point ahead of the coach, scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. They were passing through a narrow canyon when the first shot rang out, echoing against the stone walls. "Ambush!" Ryder shouted, wheeling Thunder around as more gunfire erupted from the cliffs above. The stagecoach horses reared in panic, and the driver fought to control them as bullets splintered wood around him. Ryder saw the shotgun messenger fall, clutching his shoulder. Without hesitation, he spurred Thunder toward the coach, bullets kicking up dust at his horse's hooves. "Get down!" he yelled to the driver, who had managed to halt the frightened horses. Ryder leaped from his saddle onto the coach, grabbing the reins with one hand while firing his revolver toward the attackers with the other. Marshal Turner and the others were returning fire, but they were outnumbered and in poor position. Ryder knew their only hope was to get through the canyon to the open country beyond where they could make a stand or outrun their pursuers. "Hold on," he called into the coach, not waiting for a response before he snapped the reins, sending the horses into a gallop. The stagecoach lurched forward, bouncing violently over the rough terrain as Ryder guided it through the gauntlet of gunfire. A bullet grazed his arm, but adrenaline dulled the pain. He heard Thunder's hoofbeats behind them, his loyal stallion following without command. As they cleared the canyon, Ryder risked a glance back to see 2 riders in pursuit, the others presumably delayed by Marshal Turner and his men. Ryder guided the coach off the main trail into a dense thicket of cottonwoods alongside a dry creek bed. The space was tight, branches scraping against the coach as they passed, but it offered concealment from their pursuers. "Stay inside," he ordered as he brought the coach to a halt, jumping down with his rifle in hand. He took cover behind a fallen log, sighting down the barrel as the first rider appeared. The man never knew what hit him. Ryder's shot took him squarely in the chest, sending him tumbling from his horse. The second rider pulled up short, firing wildly into the trees before wheeling his mount around to retreat. Ryder held his position, every sense alert for signs of more trouble. When none came, he cautiously approached the stagecoach. "Miss Brennan," he called out, suddenly concerned by the silence from within. The door opened slowly and Lillian emerged, her face pale but composed. There was a small cut on her cheek where flying glass had caught her, but otherwise she appeared unharmed. "That was impressive shooting, mister," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Phelps. Ryder Phelps," he answered gruffly, uncomfortable with her direct gaze. "Are you hurt?" "Just shaken," she replied, stepping down from the coach without waiting for assistance. "What about the others? The marshal and his men, if they are alive, they'll catch up," Ryder said, the harsh truth of frontier life evident in his tone. "We need to keep moving." "Those weren't all of Hadley's men." Lillian nodded, surprising him with her composure. "What do you need me to do?" Ryder assessed their situation quickly. The coach was damaged, one wheel splintered by gunfire and unlikely to hold up for long. The driver was nursing a bullet graze to his arm, and Thunder had found them, standing alert nearby. "We'll have to ride double on Thunder," he decided reluctantly. "The coach won't make it, and we're still a good 15 miles from town." The driver, a grizzled man named Hollies, shook his head. "You take the lady, Phelps. I'll wait for the marshal. Got a hideaway pistol and enough bullets to discourage company." Ryder wanted to argue but knew it was the sensible choice. He retrieved his saddlebags from the coach and secured them to Thunder's saddle. "Can you ride, Miss Brennan?" he asked. "I grew up on a farm in Missouri before my father found success in banking," she replied with unexpected spirit. "I can ride." Despite her assertion, Ryder could see exhaustion in the shadows beneath her eyes. The stagecoach journey from St. Louis would have been grueling enough without the added ordeal of an ambush. "We'll stop at Clearwater Spring to rest the horse," he conceded, helping her mount before swinging up behind her. The closeness was uncomfortable, her back pressed against his chest as they rode. Ryder kept his body rigid, maintaining as much distance as possible while still keeping her secure. They rode in silence for several miles, the rhythm of Thunder's hooves the only sound across the empty landscape. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, Ryder felt Lillian's body grow heavier against him, her head nodding forward as exhaustion claimed her. He shifted slightly, meaning to wake her, but instead found himself adjusting his arm to support her as she unconsciously leaned into him, her head coming to rest against his shoulder. Something long dormant stirred in his chest at the simple trust of the gesture. Her breathing was deep, and even her face relaxed in sleep, the worry lines that had marked her brow now smoothed away. A strand of her hair had come loose, tickling his neck in the gentle breeze. For the first time in years, Ryder felt the wall he had built around his heart tremble slightly. He quickly reinforced it, reminding himself that this woman was just a job, a responsibility he would discharge upon reaching town. Nothing more. The sun was setting when they reached Clearwater Spring, a small oasis of cottonwood trees surrounding a natural spring. Ryder gently shook Lillian awake, pretending not to notice the flush of embarrassment that colored her cheeks when she realized she had been sleeping against him. "We'll rest here for an hour," he said, dismounting and offering his hand to help her down. "Let Thunder drink and graze a bit before we continue." Lillian accepted his assistance, her legs unsteady after hours in the saddle. "Thank you, Mr. Phelps. I apologize for using you as a pillow." There was a hint of humor in her voice that caught him off guard, along with the directness of her acknowledgement. Most ladies of her apparent standing would have pretended it never happened. "No harm done," he replied stiffly, turning to tend to Thunder to hide his discomfort. As he removed the saddle to give the horse a proper rest, he was acutely aware of Lillian moving to the spring, kneeling to splash water on her face and clean the cut on her cheek. Her movements were practical and efficient, not the delicate affectations he'd expect from a banker's daughter. "May I ask why the Hadley gang targeted the stagecoach?" he ventured when the silence became too heavy. Lillian sighed, settling onto a fallen log. "My father's bank foreclosed on the Hadley ranch 2 years ago after several missed payments. Sam Hadley swore revenge, but we thought his threats were just the ranting of a bitter man. We never expected he would follow us all the way out here." "You're moving to Willow Creek?" Ryder asked, surprised. "My father sent me ahead to prepare. He's opening a new branch of his bank there. The town is growing, and with the railroad coming." Ryder nodded, understanding now why the banker would send his daughter on such a dangerous journey. The promise of wealth had drawn many to risk everything in the West. "You traveled alone?" he questioned, finding it unusual for a woman of her status. "My companion, Mrs. Fletcher, fell ill in Denver and couldn't continue," Lillian explained. "Father had already returned to St. Louis to settle affairs. I chose to proceed rather than delay our plans." Her independence impressed him, though he would never admit it. As they rested, sharing the jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, Ryder found himself studying her more carefully. There was a quiet strength in her manner, a resilience that seemed at odds with her refined appearance. "Have you been in Willow Creek long, Mr. Phelps?" she asked, breaking into his thoughts. "Long enough," he answered vaguely. "I don't usually stay in one place too long." "A wandering soul," she observed. "My mother would say you haven't found your hearth yet." The comment struck closer to home than she could know. Ryder had once had a hearth, a home filled with warmth and promise, before it was reduced to ashes and bitter memories. "Some men aren't meant for hearths, Miss Brennan," he replied, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. Lillian's eyes, the color of summer sage, studied him thoughtfully. "Every man needs somewhere to return to, Mr. Phelps, even if it's just in his heart." Before he could respond to her unexpected philosophy, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Ryder was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, positioning himself between Lillian and the approaching riders. "Get behind that boulder," he commanded, relief washing through him as he recognized Marshal Turner's silhouette against the darkening sky. The marshal and two of his deputies rode into the clearing, their horses lathered from hard riding. One man was wounded, his arm bound in a makeshift sling, but all were alive. "Thought we might find you here, Phelps," Turner called out, dismounting with a grimace of pain that suggested he hadn't escaped unscathed either. "Holly's told us which way you headed." "Holly's is alive?" Lillian asked, emerging from her hiding place. "Ornery as ever," Turner confirmed with a nod of respect toward her. "Took down two of Hadley's men before we got there. The gang scattered after that, but they won't give up easy. Hadley himself wasn't among them." The news cast a shadow over their momentary relief. If Samuel Hadley was still out there, their journey wasn't over. "We'll move at first light," Turner decided after surveying his weary men. "Safer to travel together in daylight than risk the trail at night." Though Ryder would have preferred to push on alone with Lillian, he recognized the wisdom in the marshal's plan. They made camp, with the deputies taking turns standing watch while the others rested. Ryder offered Lillian his bedroll, settling himself against a tree trunk nearby, his rifle across his lap. Sleep eluded him as his mind replayed the day's events, particularly the unfamiliar weight of Lillian's head against his shoulder, the trust implicit in that unconscious gesture. "You should rest too, Mr. Phelps," Lillian's soft voice came through the darkness. She had moved closer without him noticing, sitting now just a few feet away, wrapped in his blanket. "I'm fine," he insisted, discomfited by her proximity. "You saved my life today," she continued, undeterred by his curtness. "I never properly thanked you." "Just doing the job I was paid for," he responded, wishing she would return to her bedroll and leave him to his solitude. "Is that all it was?" she asked, her voice gentle but persistent. "Just a job," Ryder shifted uncomfortably, unused to such direct questioning. "What else would it be, Miss Brennan?" "I thought perhaps it was human decency. Compassion. Maybe even a touch of heroism," she suggested, and he could hear the smile in her voice even in the darkness. "You're romanticizing necessity," he replied gruffly. "Out here, you do what needs doing or you don't survive long." Lillian was quiet for a moment before responding. "My father says a person's true character is revealed not in what they say but in what they do when faced with difficult choices." "Your actions speak well of you, Mr. Phelps, whether you admit it or not." Her words unsettled him more than he cared to acknowledge. For years, he had defined himself by his solitude, his refusal to form attachments, his determination to prevent another loss like the one that had nearly destroyed him. Yet this woman, in less than a day, had begun to challenge that carefully constructed identity. "Get some sleep, Miss Brennan," he said finally. "Tomorrow will be a long day." To his relief, she returned to her bedroll without further conversation, though he could feel her gaze lingering on him in the darkness. Ryder stared into the night, trying to ignore the unfamiliar warmth that had taken root in his chest. Morning brought a clear sky and the promise of scorching heat as the sun climbed. They set out for Willow Creek with Marshall Turner in the lead, Ryder bringing up the rear with Lillian once again, riding double with him on Thunder. Despite his reservations, he found himself acutely aware of her presence, the way she held herself straight and dignified despite the discomfort of sharing a saddle. They were within 5 miles of town when Turner raised his hand for a halt, pointing to a dust cloud on the horizon moving rapidly in their direction. "Riders coming fast," the marshal announced grimly. "Could be Hadley." Ryder assessed their position quickly. They were exposed on the open plain, with only a small copse of trees to their east offering any cover. "The trees," he suggested. "We can make a stand there if needed." Turner nodded in agreement, and they veered off the trail toward the modest shelter. As they reached the trees, the approaching riders came into clearer view. 6 men, riding hard, their intentions evident in their posture. "Miss Brennan, stay down," Ryder instructed, helping her dismount and guiding her to shelter behind a thick tree trunk. He removed his spare revolver from his saddlebag and handed it to her. "Use this if you need to, but only if they get past us." Her fingers closed around the weapon with surprising confidence. "I can shoot, Mr. Phelps. My father made certain of it." Another unexpected revelation about Lillian Brennan that intrigued him despite himself. There was no time to dwell on it, however, as the riders were closing in rapidly. "That's Hadley in the lead," Turner confirmed, readying his rifle. "Looks like he gathered all his remaining men for this." The odds were not in their favor, 6 against 5, and 2 of their number already wounded. Ryder checked his weapons methodically, pushing aside all thoughts except survival. The first shots came as Hadley's men approached the tree line, forcing them to scatter and take cover behind their horses. The exchange of gunfire was fierce, bullets splintering bark and kicking up dirt around them. Ryder fired with measured precision, each shot deliberate and focused. One of Hadley's men fell, then another, but the deputies were pinned down, unable to advance or retreat. Ryder spotted Hadley himself circling to the south, attempting to flank their position. Without hesitation, he moved to intercept, keeping low and using the trees for cover. He emerged from the trees just as Hadley was dismounting, catching the man by surprise. Hadley was faster than Ryder expected, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. The bullet grazed Ryder's side, sending a searing pain through his ribs, but he remained standing, his own revolver level and unwavering. "Drop it, Hadley," Ryder commanded, his voice cold. "It's over." Hadley's face twisted with hatred. "Not until the Brennan girl pays for what her father did. He took everything from me. And you'll lose what's left if you don't put that gun down now," Ryder warned, blood seeping through his shirt where the bullet had torn flesh. For a moment, it seemed Hadley might surrender, his gun hand wavering. Then his eyes hardened, and Ryder knew the man had made his choice. As Hadley began to raise his weapon again, a shot rang out not from Ryder's gun, but from behind him. Hadley staggered, dropping his revolver as he clutched at his shoulder. Ryder turned to see Lillian standing firm, his spare revolver still raised in her steady hands, her eyes wide but determined. "I told you I could shoot," she said simply, lowering the gun as Marshal Turner and his deputies converged on them, securing Hadley and his remaining men. Ryder found himself speechless, staring at this woman who continued to defy his expectations at every turn. The pain in his side suddenly made itself known with renewed intensity, and he swayed slightly on his feet. "You're hurt," Lillian exclaimed, moving to his side with concern. "Let me see." Before he could protest, She had lifted his shirt to examine the wound, her touch gentle but firm as she assessed the damage. "It's not deep, but it needs cleaning. Sit down before you fall down, Mr. Phelps." Strangely, he found himself obeying, sinking to the ground as she retrieved a canteen and a clean handkerchief from her pocket. The marshal and his men were busy securing the prisoners, leaving them in an unexpected moment of privacy. "This will sting," she warned before pressing the dampened cloth to his wound. Ryder tensed at the sharp pain but remained silent, watching her face as she worked, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Where did a banker's daughter learn to tend wounds?" he asked, trying to distract himself from both the pain and the warmth of her proximity. A small smile touched her lips. "The same place she learned to shoot. My father believed in practical education for his children, regardless of gender. My brother fought in the war, and I helped nurse the wounded when they returned." "You continue to surprise me, Miss Brennan," Ryder admitted, wincing as she tied a makeshift bandage around his ribs. "Is that so terrible?" she asked, her eyes meeting his directly. "It's unsettling," he confessed, finding himself unable to look away. Her smile deepened slightly. "Perhaps being unsettled occasionally is good for the soul, Mr. Phelps." Before he could respond to this philosophical assertion, Marshal Turner approached, informing them that they would proceed to town immediately. Hadley and his men would face justice, and Ryder's wound could receive proper attention from the town doctor. The remainder of the journey passed without incident, though Ryder was acutely aware of Lillian's concern as she rode behind him, her arms carefully positioned to avoid his injury. As they entered Willow Creek, a crowd gathered to witness the return of the marshal and his prisoners, word of the stagecoach ambush having spread through town. Dr. Morrison attended to Ryder's wound at the marshal's office, cleaning and bandaging it properly while Lillian gave her statement about the events. When the formalities were concluded, Ryder found himself at loose ends, uncertain of what came next. His job was done, his payment secured, yet he felt strangely reluctant to return to his solitary existence. "Mr. Phelps," Lillian called as he was preparing to leave. "Might I impose upon you for one more service?" Ryder turned, raising an eyebrow in question. "Miss Brennan." "I find myself without accommodation until my father's house is ready," she explained. "The marshal mentioned you might know of a reputable boarding house in town." It was a simple request, one he could easily fulfill with directions, yet Ryder found himself offering, "I can escort you there if you wish." Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "That would be most kind." As they walked through town toward Widow Cooper's boarding house, Ryder was uncomfortably aware of the curious glances from townsfolk. He had cultivated a reputation for aloofness that his current companionship directly contradicted. "People are staring," Lillian observed quietly. "I'm not known for socializing," Ryder admitted. "A deliberate choice?" she inquired. He hesitated, then nodded. "It's simpler that way." "Simpler," she repeated thoughtfully. "But is it better?" The question hung between them as they reached the boarding house, a well-maintained two-story building with lace curtains in the windows. Widow Cooper herself answered the door, her weathered face lighting up at the sight of a potential boarder. After introductions and arrangements were made for Lillian's stay, Ryder found himself lingering on the porch, reluctant to depart despite having fulfilled his obligation. "Thank you, Mr. Phelps," Lillian said, extending her hand to him. "For everything." As he took her hand, intending a brief, formal handshake, she surprised him by holding on, her fingers warm and firm against his calloused palm. "I hope our paths will cross again," she added softly. "Willow Creek is a small town," he replied, attempting nonchalance despite the unexpected flutter in his chest. Her smile was knowing. "Indeed it is. Perhaps at the Sunday social. I hear Widow Cooper insists all her boarders attend." Before he could formulate a refusal, she had released his hand and stepped inside, leaving him with an invitation he had no intention of accepting, and yet couldn't entirely dismiss. The week that followed saw Ryder returning to his routine, taking odd jobs, keeping to himself at the saloon, riding Thunder out to the plains when the walls of town seemed to close in on him. Yet thoughts of Lillian Brennan intruded with increasing frequency, her direct gaze and thoughtful questions lingering in his mind. He told himself it was merely curiosity about an unusual woman, nothing more. The wall around his heart remained intact if slightly weathered. When Sunday arrived, he saddled Thunder with every intention of spending the day far from town and the social gathering he knew Lillian would attend. Yet as he rode past the town hall where the weekly social was held, the sound of piano music and laughter drifting through the open windows, his resolve wavered. He circled the block once, then twice, berating himself for his indecision. On the third pass, he caught sight of Lillian through the window, her hair styled more elegantly than during their journey, her dress a soft green that reminded him of spring meadows. She was smiling at something the mayor's wife was saying, but there was a reserve in her manner, a subtle distance that suggested she was not entirely comfortable in the crowd of strangers. Before he could reconsider, Ryder found himself dismounting, securing Thunder to the hitching post, and straightening his vest, the cleanest one he owned, though still far from fancy. He entered the hall with his hat in his hands, feeling conspicuously out of place among the Sunday finery of Willow Creek's respectable citizens. Lillian spotted him immediately, her eyes widening in surprise before a genuine smile transformed her face. She excused herself from her conversation and made her way to him through the crowd. "Mr. Phelps," she greeted him warmly. "I confess I did not expect to see you here." "Neither did I," he admitted, the honesty surprising even himself. Her laugh was like the clear water of Clearwater Spring, refreshing and pure. "Well, I'm glad you changed your mind. Would you care for some punch?" The afternoon passed in a blur of conversation and cautious reacquaintance. Ryder discovered that Lillian possessed not only courage and practical skills but a sharp wit and genuine interest in others that drew him out of his shell, despite his best defenses. They spoke of her plans for settling in Willow Creek, her hopes for establishing a small school alongside her father's bank, her love of literature and music. In turn, she coaxed from him stories of his travels, his knowledge of the land, his quiet appreciation for the beauty of the wilderness. What he did not share not yet was the pain that had driven him to solitude, the loss that had shaped his reluctance to form attachments. As the social drew to a close, Ryder offered to walk Lillian back to the boarding house, a gesture that felt both natural and terrifying in its implications. "I hear there's to be a town meeting tomorrow about the railroad coming through," Lillian mentioned as they strolled along the boardwalk, the setting sun casting long shadows across the dusty street. "Planning to attend?" Ryder asked, already suspecting the answer. "Of course," she replied with a hint of mischief in her voice. "I have invested interest in the town's growth after all. Will you be there?" Ryder had never attended a town meeting in his life, had never felt part of any community enough to care about its decisions. Yet he found himself nodding. "I might stop by." Her smile was worth the commitment, though he tried not to dwell on why that should matter to him. Days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, as summer yielded to the golden hues of autumn. Without quite intending it, Ryder found himself drawn into Lillian's orbit. accompanying her to town functions, helping with preparations for her father's arrival, even assisting with the renovation of the building that would house both bank and school. Each interaction chipped away at the wall he had built around his heart, each shared smile and conversation creating a breach in his defenses that grew wider with time. Yet still, he kept the deepest part of himself guarded, the pain of his past a secret he was not ready to share. It was on a crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch of the newly completed Brennan residence, awaiting her father's arrival on the following day's stagecoach, that Lillian finally broached the subject that had hung unspoken between them. "You've never told me why you choose solitude, Ryder," she said softly, using his first name as had become their custom in private. "I've seen how people respond to you, the respect they offer. You could have friends, connections, yet you hold yourself apart." Ryder stared out at the darkening street, considering whether to deflect the question as he had done before. Something in the quiet expectancy of her presence beside him made evasion seem suddenly cowardly. "I had a wife once," he began, the words emerging rough and unpracticed. "Sarah. We had a small ranch near Fort Griffin. I was away driving cattle when Comanche raiders came through. By the time I returned—" His voice faltered, the memory still raw despite the passing years. Lillian's hand found his in the gathering darkness, her touch an anchor as he continued. "She was with child, our first. Neither survived." The stark facts, delivered without embellishment, somehow conveyed the depth of his loss more powerfully than any elaborate description could have. "Oh, Ryder," Lillian whispered, her fingers tightening around his. "I am so sorry. I swore then that I would never risk that kind of pain again," he concluded, his voice steadier now. "Never give anyone the power to leave a hole that size in my life." They sat in silence as stars appeared in the velvet sky above them, Lillian's hand still clasped in his, offering comfort without demands. "May I tell you what I think?" she finally asked, her voice gentle. Ryder nodded, unable to form words around the tightness in his throat. "I think Sarah would not want her memory to be the reason you deny yourself happiness," Lillian said carefully. "Loss is the price we pay for love, yes, but would you truly trade the time you had with her to have been spared the pain of losing her?" The question struck him like a physical blow. In all his years of grief and self-imposed isolation, he had never considered it from that perspective. Would he erase Sarah from his life to avoid the agony of her death? The answer came with immediate certainty. "No," he admitted hoarsely. "I wouldn't trade a single day." Lillian's smile was tender in the moonlight. "Then perhaps the question isn't whether to risk pain again, but whether what might be gained is worth that risk." She rose from her chair then, pausing to press a gentle kiss to his cheek before retreating into the house, leaving Ryder alone with thoughts that swirled like autumn leaves in a whirlwind. He returned to his small rented room above the livery stable that night, sleep eluding him as Lillian's words echoed in his mind. By dawn, he had reached a decision that both terrified and exhilarated him. Edward Brennan arrived on the afternoon stagecoach, a distinguished man whose sharp eyes and firm handshake suggested the practical nature Lillian had inherited. Ryder stood somewhat apart from the welcoming party, watching the reunion between father and daughter with a curious mixture of apprehension and resolve. To his surprise, Lillian immediately brought her father over to introduce them, her pride in the acquaintance evident in her voice. "Father, this is Ryder Phelps, the man who saved my life during the journey." "Ryder, my father, Edward Brennan." "Mr. Phelps," the banker said warmly, shaking his hand with genuine gratitude. "I understand I owe you a debt that can never be repaid. My Lillian is all I have in this world." "No debt, sir," Ryder replied honestly. Your daughter is quite capable of saving herself and others." Edward laughed, glancing at his daughter with obvious pride. "That sounds like my Lillian, headstrong and resourceful since she was knee-high to a grasshopper." As they walked to the Brennan house, Ryder found himself surprisingly at ease with the older man, whose forthright manner and obvious devotion to his daughter earned Ryder's immediate respect. When Edward mentioned his plans to expand the bank's operations and his need for trustworthy men to manage security for money shipments, Ryder found himself considering possibilities that would have seemed impossible months ago. That evening, at the small dinner party Lillian hosted to welcome her father, Ryder waited until most guests had departed before approaching Edward privately, requesting a moment of his time. Lillian observed them from across the room, curiosity evident in her expression. "Sir," Ryder began, uncharacteristically uncertain of his words, "I want to speak with you about your daughter." Edward's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained open. "Go on, Mr. Phelps." "I've come to care for Lillian deeply," Ryder continued, the confession both frightening and freeing. "More than I believed possible after certain events in my past. With your permission, I would like to court her properly." A slow smile spread across the banker's face. "I suspected as much from the way she speaks of you, and from the way you look at her when you think no one notices." Ryder felt heat rise in his face, unaccustomed to having his emotions so transparently rayed. "Then, I have your blessing." "You have my conditional approval," Edward amended carefully. "Dependent on my daughter's wishes, of course. Lillian makes her own decisions, always has. But I would be pleased to welcome a man of your character into our family, should matters progress in that direction." Relief and anticipation coursed through Ryder as he thanked the older man. As the last guests departed and Edward retired to his room, pleading fatigue from travel, Ryder found himself alone with Lillian in the parlor, the lamplight casting a warm glow over her features. "What were you and Father discussing so seriously?" she asked, a hint of mischief in her eyes suggesting she might already suspect. "Your future," Ryder answered honestly, taking a step toward her. "And I hope mine as well." Lillian's breath caught audibly. "And what conclusion did you reach?" "That some risks are worth taking," he said softly, reaching for her hand. "That some walls are meant to be torn down. That I have been half alive for 8 years, and only began to truly breathe again when a certain banker's daughter fell asleep against my shoulder during a dangerous ride." Tears glistened in Lillian's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Are you saying what I think you're saying, Ryder Phelps?" "I'm saying that I love you, Lillian Brennan," he declared, the words no longer locked behind the wall of his grief. "And if you'll have me, I want to spend whatever years were granted learning how to be whole again, with you." Her answer came not in words but in movement as she closed the distance between them, her arms encircling his neck, her lips meeting his in a kiss that spoke of homecoming and new beginnings. When they finally parted, both breathless, she rested her forehead against his. "I've been waiting for you to realize what I've known since that day at Clearwater Spring," she murmured. "That some hearts are meant to find each other, no matter what walls they hide behind." In the spring of 1876, Willow Creek witnessed the wedding of the town's most unexpected couple, the once solitary cowboy and the banker's daughter, whose courage and compassion had breached the defenses around his heart. Thunder, adorned with ribbons for the occasion, stood proudly outside the church as townsfolk gathered to celebrate the union that few had predicted, but all now cheered. As they exchanged vows beneath the blossoming apple trees in the churchyard, Ryder felt the last remnants of his self-imposed isolation fall away. The pain of his past would always be with him, a scar upon his heart, but it no longer defined him or limited his capacity for joy. Years later, as they sat on the porch of their ranch house watching their children play in the golden light of sunset, Ryder would remember that fateful journey and the moment when a woman's head had come to rest trustingly against his shoulder. It had been the beginning of his awakening, the first crack in a wall he had believed impenetrable. "What are you thinking about?" Lillian would ask, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. About how a man who didn't want to fall in love found himself ambushed by a woman who knew exactly when to fall asleep. He would answer with a smile that held both the memory of pain and the fullness of present happiness. And Lillian would laugh, the sound still as clear and refreshing as that spring water had been on their first journey together. A reminder that love, like water in the desert, could bring life to places long thought barren.